U.S. Southern Command tells ABC News U.S. forces have boarded another Venezuela-linked oil tanker in the Caribbean. It marks the fifth tanker the U.S. has seized and the third in just the last 3 days. Meanwhile, President Trump says he's canceled a second wave of attacks on Venezuela after the release of several political prisoners. White House correspondent Karen Travers and senior Pentagon reporter Louis Martinez have more on that. So, Louis, what's the latest on this new oil tanker seizure?
What we do know, Diane, is that this is the Alina, the motor transport vessel Alina, which is also under sanctions. And so we saw a team of helicopters take off from the U.S. aircraft carrier Gerald R. Ford, which is in the Caribbean. The Navy helicopters then landed, and presumably this was once again a U.S. Coast Guard-led mission with U.S. military support. The video that you see there shows once again an elite ground team boarding the vessel and then taking over it. This is, as you said, now the fifth vessel that the United States is taken over, and with this is the third in 3 days, which indicates that we are potentially on the verge of an uptick in these kinds of operations. What we have heard from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is that the United States is poised to do these kinds of operations anywhere in the world, and as we saw over in the last 2 days, that includes in the very North Atlantic, where that one Russian-flagged vessel was taken over by the United States in a joint U.S. military mission with the Coast Guard. But right now it appears that this Coast Guard team has once again taken over this now fifth vessel, and potentially maybe more on the way.
And Karen, President Trump says he's canceling a second wave of attacks on Venezuela, but it sounds like he's still keeping troops ready for it.
Yeah, the president said this in a post overnight, that because Venezuela says that they're going to release political prisoners, that the expected, that's the word he used, second wave of strikes against Venezuela will not go forward at this point. The president said that the indication of Venezuela releasing those political prisoners was a sign of them seeking peace, and he called it a very important and smart gesture. The president had put the idea out there of a second wave of strikes if the interim president there, Delcy Rodriguez, and the government were not going to continue cooperating with the United States. So I think the president's still leaving that out there as an option, saying that the ships will stay in place for safety and security purposes. But certainly this is something that the president has put out there as somewhat of a threat against Rodriguez and the government, saying work with us or else there could be further military action.
Louis, what are you learning about the plans for those attacks now on hold?
Well, Diane, it's really unclear. What we do know is that the 15,000 U.S. military personnel that remain in the Caribbean. That's where their force has been growing over the last couple of months. Some of those assets were used in the raid that took place this past weekend that captured Nicolas Maduro and his wife and transported them to New York. So there are aircraft in the region. There are Navy ships in the region. As I just mentioned, the aircraft carrier is still there in the Caribbean. 2,200 Marines still remain there in the region. And so, therefore, the U.S. military's capability in the region remains, but as we know, it doesn't mean that you only have to use the assets that are there, because we saw that B-1 bombers were also potentially used in this past weekend as part of the mission to capture Maduro. So whether or not whether the president is saying that yes, the second wave could have happened or has been called off, the capability still remains, which is an important thing. And I think that's part of the pressure tactic that the United States, the Trump administration, has been using against the acting government in Venezuela, which is they're talking about maximum pressure. They're talking about the blockade, as they call it, really more of a quarantine. And we're seeing that placed into effect just again today with the seizure of that oil tanker that's under sanctions. So essentially they're trying to pressure Venezuela by reminding them that the United States military presence is there, and it can be used either in a potential second wave, if that ever happens, or again, just through the continuing seizure of these oil tankers that are under sanction.
All right, Karen Travers, Louis Martinez, thank you.